So you'll have to make an approval on that one if you would.
Did it?
And what I'm going to do is I will share this recording with you tomorrow. And so then you can, while you're going through your homework and working through your homework, you can listen to my voice again. You can replay it. And then next week, I'll do the exact same thing. And so that you get a recording of this class, which makes it a little bit easier for you.
Okay.
Okay. And then let me make sure everybody's in. Okay. Brett, you're coming in.
Yes. Hi.
Welcome. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you.
Good, good, good. Okay, so we've got everybody. I should see one more person maybe coming in tonight. And as I just said, this is being recorded and I'll share that with you tomorrow. And so you've got your handouts, everybody?
Yes.
Correct? Good. And then you got
Yes.
your handout that asked you to please get your camera all set up,
Mhm.
right? And you found most of that stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, most.
Most. Okay. Very good. Very good. Okay. So we'll find the rest of it tonight. And if not, and I'm sure we will, so I'm not even going to say if not. So what we're going to do tonight is on your handout, you will see that the first lesson, the basic lesson is metering the light, depth of field, shutter speed. And then when we're talking about our storage and that type thing with our histograms. So those are the things that we're going to cover today, because the 4 building blocks of photography are your light meter, your f-stop, your shutter speed, and your ISO. Those are the 4 components that you have to manipulate for any photo that you want to take. And once you get those 4 components down, then you're going to be able to photograph anything at all and anything that you want to. So we're going to concentrate on those, because if you see that red and green macaw flying by in Brazil, you cannot ask this bird to stop and please hang tight while you figure out which dial you need to push on your camera to get your photograph. And it's the same thing when that lioness is raising her head up out of the grass. You are going to have to know rapidly, is this your light meter? Is this your f-stop? Is this your shutter speed? Or is this your ISO? What are you going to need to manipulate on your camera to get the picture that you want? So something like a tall masted sailing ship coming through the harbor of Venice, or even something as simple and easy to photograph as the Milky Way. You've got to know whether it's your light meter, it's your f-stop, it's your shutter speed, or it's your ISO that you have to use. And there we go. So from the simple stuff, like the kids doing something really cute that you just want to capture, to something that's a little bit, come on, computer, it's lagging on me just a little bit. Come on, there you go. To something that's a little bit more complicated, like the solar eclipse. We've got 2 solar eclipses coming up. You've got to know which one of those 4 components is the most important thing to get you to get the photograph that you're looking for. And so what I'm going to do tonight is I am going to teach you what your light meter is, why you change your f-stop, what an f-stop is and why you change it, what your shutter speed is and why you change it, and then your ISO when you change your ISO, because these are the 4 building blocks of photography. Everybody is on the M mode up on the top of your camera, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, the M mode on the top of your camera. Okay. So why I've got you in the M mode, this is the manual mode. Nothing on your camera now is going to change until you change it. And so that's why I've got you on the M mode on the top of the camera. And so anything that you try to photograph, from the crystal ball to your cat sitting in front of the holiday lights, anything that you try to photograph in the manual mode, you're in charge of all the settings on your camera. And so that's where I want you all to be for tonight, is in the manual mode. And then tomorrow, or excuse me, next week when we meet, I'll explain to you what some of the other modes are on your camera. Now, also, why I want you on the manual mode. And by the way, Mark and Brett, you all can use you can leave your cameras on if you all want to, or if you don't want to, you don't have to. But if you want to, it makes it a little bit more personal. I don't feel like I'm talking to a blank screen. Why I've also got you in the manual mode on the top of your camera is if you learn light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, it's a little like learning how to ride a bike. You are never going to forget how to do it. So if you learn those 4 components, then they're sticking in your head. And Carol, I'm going to re-nudge those components in your head so that you remember them again, okay? But if you get those components in your head, then you know them. And then if you want to shoot in one of the more programming modes, then you're more than welcome to do that. But I have people after all these years of me teaching basic photography that they're so glad that they learned f-stop, shutter speed, ISO, and light meter, because now they understand photography. And so that's what I'm trying to teach you for the next 2 class periods that we have. After that, if you don't want to go this direction, then you can go in a different direction, just put the camera on program mode. But for tonight, you're going to learn how to use it in the manual mode. I will warn you ahead of time. It's a little challenging. Some people find it really hard. Some people catch on immediately. And then other people, it takes a little bit. So be patient with yourself. Nobody's ever died from having to learn f-stop and shutter speed and balancing their light meter. And so just be patient with yourself. It's easy, but it is a bit on the technical side. So I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so everybody's got your camera in front of you.
Yes.
And Brett, what camera do you have? I didn't hear from you.
The Canon EOS 77 that you recommended.
Which one? The 77? 77? Okay, D. Okay. Okay. So everybody, you've got a pull-out screen on your camera. We are not going to use this. So you will twist it around and put it back flat against the back of the camera so that you can just look at the information coming back at you. That pull-out screen is a nice thing in the event that you've got the camera down on the ground and you want to be able to photograph something from ground level, or when you're looking overhead and you want to photograph something looking overhead. That's not a bad thing. But for day-to-day shooting, you are not going to use that flip-out screen off to the side. So we're not going to use that. And then you want to make sure that the diopter has been set for your eyes. Did everybody find where the diopter was?
Yes.
On your camera? Did you find where it was? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now, what this little diopter is, for the Nikon, it is it's a little lever. For the Canons, it's a little dial. And I think for the Lumix, it's a little dial as well. But it's this tiny little dial right next to the side of the viewfinder. And this adjusts for your eye prescription. So when you look through the viewfinder and you push the shutter button halfway down, when you adjust the diopter, then the numbers through the viewfinder should be perfectly clear for you. It's not the view through the viewfinder, it's the numbers through the viewfinder. And then, by the way, Sue, for instance, when you hand your camera to your husband, he is not going to be able to look through it and see clearly if you two both have the same unless you two both have the same eye prescription.
I
So
don't
when
even-
Well,
I don't even know what I'm looking for.
I'm trying to get the letters to come on in the eye speed.
you just push the shutter button halfway down, that turns
Ah,
everything on through the
that's right.
viewfinder. Yeah. So when you look through the viewfinder, you push the button halfway down, shutter button halfway down right in the front, and then the numbers come on. Then you adjust that little teeny weeny diopter so that the numbers that you see through the viewfinder are perfectly clear. So if you hand your camera to somebody else, they may not be able to see through the viewfinder of your camera because you've now adjusted it for your eye prescription. Okay, so individually on the backs of your camera. So Mark, this looks like yours, correct? Your Lumix. And then Mark on this front dial right here, this is where you're going to change your f-stop. So this front dial here. And then when we get to f-stop and mark, wait for it to change. There we go. No, wrong one. There we go. And mark on your back dial right here. This is where your shutter speed is going to change. So your f-stop changes on your front dial and your shutter speed changes on your back dial. And then mark your back display panel looks like this.
No, mine's a slightly different one. I'm wondering, do I hit, well, see, you've got that on program.
Right,
I'm
but that's okay because it's the only screen capture I could find quickly today.
Oh, okay.
So I
Well,
want
but
you
I do have all that information. I've got
Okay.
f-stop, I've got shutter speed, I've got ISO.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so it just kind of looks like this, something
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah,
Good.
all the-
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to come back to this one. And so I've got you on that one. And then on the Canon Rebels. So on the Canon Rebels, that's Angela and Susan on yours. We want to make sure on both of you, if you've got your on and off down there, there we go, up here on the top. But we also want to make sure in any of you all with the Canon cameras now, you want to make sure that this is not turned off or it's not on lock. So Carol, you probably see this on the back of your camera, and Brett,
No
you see it
word.
on the back of your camera. You want to make sure that that lock is not locked. You want to make sure you leave it unlocked all the time.
I don't see any lock on mine.
You don't have it on yours, Sue.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're okay on that. And then on your back dial on Brett and Carol, your back dial is going to change your f-stop on your cameras. And then I think, oh yeah, and then your front dial is going to change your shutter speed. Your back dial is going to change your f-stop. And then this one looks like yours, Carol.
Yes.
Yeah, so here's your ISO button up here, for instance.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. And then here's the 70D, Carol. So your back display panel looks a bit like this. And
Right.
Brett, yours should look very similar to this, correct? And
Correct.
then to move around this back display panel, Brett and Carol, then you all will push this Q button. And then you're going to toggle with this little wheel right here, and that'll let you move around. Or you can use the big back dial to move around, or you can move the front dial to move around as well.
And it's touchscreen too.
It's touchscreen. Okay, good. That makes it easy too. There you go. And then Carol, Sue, yours should look like this, your Rebel T3i. And then your back display panel, once again, looks like this. To get to your back display panel, you push your Q button, and then you can toggle with any of these little dials, these little buttons right here to move around, move up and down and around. And then Sue and Angela, both of you on your back of your camera, you have a little AV button right here. You see that AV button? So when you push that with your thumb and hold it in, and then rotate your front dial, that changes your f-stop. And then Angela, here's yours. You've got the 7, and it's the same thing. You're going to push and hold your plus minus button with this right here, your thumb, and then rotate your front dial, and that changes your f-stop.
Okay.
Okay. Angela, also, you will, you have either a customized information display or the standard, the guided or the standard. And this black display panel is called the standard. And this is the one that I want you to have on your back display panel.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
And then here's the top of your Rebel on the 7. So it looks very similar to what I just showed Sue on her Rebel.
yeah.
And then Pam's not with us tonight, but I'm just going to cover it with Pam on the recording. So Pam, here's your camera, your Nikon, And to activate your back display panel, Pamela, you're going to push this I button right here, lower left-hand corner. Push the I button. That's going to activate each one of these display options over here. And then you can move up and down with your toggle button. And when they're activated, I think they're orange, if I'm not mistaken. And then you would simply push in your set button, and that's how you make changes. So I'll periodically talk to Pamela, by the way, since she's not here tonight. Okay, everybody, that's just a brief overview of your camera so that I can talk just about your camera. Now, what I want you to do, everybody's in the M mode up on the top of the camera, correct?
Yes.
Okay, now I want you to look through the viewfinder, if you would, and push your shutter button halfway down. And when you look through your viewfinder and push your shutter button halfway down, you're going to see a scale in the bottom center of the viewfinder. Everybody see that scale in the bottom center?
Yes.
And it looks very similar to what you see on the screen. Everybody see it?
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
ma'am.
Okay, good. Okay. And that scale in the bottom of your viewfinder is called your light meter scale. So that light meter scale is how the light meter inside of your camera is trying to communicate to you. Mark, do you have a scale inside your viewfinder?
Well, I'm actually, yeah, I'm using my screen, and yes, I do have a scale.
You see the scale.
Well, let me just see, because when I hit it, it says digital zoom. So it's not,
Do you see the scale on maybe the back when you're just looking
yeah,
through?
well,
Yeah.
well, that's what I'm looking at. So it's similar because, you know, it has both, you have ISO and you also have a thing, but, and it looks like a scale. It has -3, you know, goes
Yeah.
up to 0 there. So that does look like it's a scale, but you know,
Okay.
it doesn't mean reference as such.
Okay, that's what it is. Okay, so that is your light meter scale. And you see it when you look through the viewfinder, and then you can also see it when you just look on the back of the camera. But you
Right.
see it when you look through the viewfinder, and that's how we're going to be taking pictures most of the time. Mark, you've got a smaller camera, and so I'll give you a break, and you get to look through the viewfinder sometimes, but you can look on the back if that's easier for you, just because your camera is smaller. But everybody else, we're going to be looking through the viewfinder. Now, that light meter scale, put your camera down for now, and let me explain to you what your light meter is and what it is trying to accomplish and why it's so important that we pay attention to this scale. So inside your camera, there is this thing called a light meter. And the light, and you can't see it or you can't touch it, it's inside the camera. And what the light meter is doing is it's reading the light that's coming through your viewfinder. And it's reading the light and seeing that we've got a shadowed area and a mid-tone area and a really bright area like you see on the screen, but it's reading the light. And then what it's doing is it's saying, based on this light right here, and based on the settings that you have right now dialed into this camera, I need you to make an adjustment. And if you'll make that adjustment, that light meter will bring you to a perfectly exposed image. But if you don't make that adjustment, then you're going to get a really dark image or a really light image. And so that light meter is trying to talk to you. It's trying to tell you, put me in the middle. And if you put me in the middle, I'll give you a perfectly exposed image. So that's what your light meter is trying to do. Prior to the 1950s, photographers held this light meter in their hand. They pointed it at whatever they were going to photograph. They looked at it, and then they transferred those settings to their camera body because there was no light meter inside the camera. My father's light meter I inherited from him along with his slide rule, and they do equally as important jobs, but we don't have to use them anymore. So when the light meter went inside the camera, now we had to pay attention to what the light meter was trying to tell us. Except today, all these years later, you have 3 to possibly 4 different light meters inside your camera. So depending on how you, the human, set your light meter, then that's how the light meter is reading the light. So you told it to read the light in a certain way, and that's what it's doing. But if you told it wrong, it's doing its job and it's leading you in the direction you told it. But if you didn't tell it right, then it's leading you astray. So you, the human, have to know how to set the light meter properly in your camera. So let me tell you, on your handout, I've given you the 3 to 4 most common light meters that we have. So the first one is called a center weighted light meter. And this was the one that was developed in the 1950s. It's been around ever since then. And the center weighted light meter reads all the light in the entire frame. So this picture that you're seeing on the screen right now, it reads the sun up in the top, it reads the middle tones along the side of the boat, it reads the dark shadows on the bottom, it reads all of that light, and then it just simply averages it. But if you took black paint and mixed it with white paint, what color do you get?
Gray.
Gray, exactly. And that's pretty much what a center weighted light meter does. It just takes all the colors, all the light in the entire frame, and it just averages it all together. So we end up with something that's not really dramatic because it's just averaging everything all together. So your center weighted light meter is the light meter we will not use. So you can just put yourself a line through that one. Your spot meter, on the other hand, came about in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And your spot meter is very different in that it only reads the spot in the center of the frame. It ignores where the sun is, it ignores where the shade is, and it only reads that spot in the center of the frame. So when you put your scale right in the middle, it's only telling you the perfect exposure for that spot of light right in the center of the frame. Now, that doesn't sound very interesting, except at its time, this was pretty revolutionary. Because if we were photographing a subject against a very dark background, then we could now properly expose that subject and not have the background interfere in the exposure. Or if we were photographing a subject against a very light background, we could now photograph the subject and not have that light background interfere with the exposure. So for instance, a performer in a spotlight on a dark stage, using spot meter, we could put that spot meter on the performer, dial in the f-stop, dial in the shutter speed, get a perfect exposure on the performer, and now the performer would come out perfectly exposed, but the background would still be fairly dark. If we were photographing something against the brilliant blue sky, the brilliant blue sky is the kiss of death in photography. It's just too bright. We don't think it's too bright, but it is in photography. So if I were photographing a hawk on a branch against a brilliant blue sky, then the picture in the old days used to come out as a silhouette, and we didn't get the hawk properly exposed. Where if I'd use spot meter and put the spot on the hawk's breast and dialed in the f-stop and shutter speed, then I got a properly exposed hawk on a branch. So spot meter is used if I have a subject that is really, really bright against a dark background, or really, really dark against a bright background, a lot of contrast between the subject and the background. That's when I would use spot. Canon calls this partial meter. Nikon calls it spot, and Mark, your Lumix, calls it spot also. And so your spot meter, we might use that maybe about 1% of the time, but we're not going to use it very much. So it's only in a super contrasty situation. The most common light meter that we're going to use, on the other hand, is called your matrix if you're a Nikon user. It's called your evaluative if you're a Canon user. And Mark, I suspect for your Lumix that it's called a segmented or a multi or something like that. And what this light meter does is it reads all the light in one section of the frame. and then it reads all the light in another section of the frame. And then it reads all the light in another section of the frame, and all the light in another section of the frame, and then all the light in another section of the frame. And inside those individual sections, it averages it. And your evaluative or your matrix or your segmented or your multi-light meter, as they're called now, these are the most advanced light meters we have. So we're going to use these about 99% of the time, because most of the time they're going to lead us right where we need to be on a perfectly exposed image. Those of you with newer cameras and more high-end cameras, you're not just reading 5 segments, but the newer high-end cameras are reading up to 64 different segments. And the new high-end cameras even know that that's a bright sun and that's a dark shadowed area. And so they even know how to make adjustments on that. So that's why we can leave these cameras set on the evaluative matrix or segmented or multi-light meter almost 99% of the time now. So your evaluative or your matrix metering is where we want to be. And I'll make sure you're set there in just a second. So to give you an example of why this is so important, this photograph was taken with my evaluative or my matrix light meter. And then I did one more thing, and I'll tell you about that later on. I won't tell you right now because it doesn't make any sense to you. This photo was taken with my spot or my partial meter. The difference between the two is the lighter one. That's what I saw with my eye. So the side of the shrimp boat, that's what I told the camera to properly expose when I set my spot meter or my partial meter. So it properly exposed the side of the shrimp boat. But then the more creative image that I took, that's because I did that with my evaluative or my matrix meter, and it knows darks and lights and averaged them all together. So which light meter we set is ultimately our beginning point for each one of our photographs. So now before you take a photograph, you need to look at your subject and analyze it and think, okay, is my evaluative or my matrix or my segmented or my multi-light meter going to be able to handle this? Or am I going to need to move to my spot meter, like in this case with the white of the barn owl's face against that super dark background? Maybe I need to move to my spot or my partial light meter. And remember, it's called partial for you Canon users, and it's called spot for everybody else. So when you look at a scene now, you need to analyze it and decide whether that light meter that you've got set right now is going to be able to handle it. And once again, 99% of the time it's going to work. Yeah, Carol.
Just question on mine, it actually has both partial and spot. as two
Yeah.
different meters.
And what happened with Canon is Canon for years called it partial.
Uh-huh.
Nikon got to the copyright office first and got to call it spot all those years ago. So Canon called it partial. And then after a while, of course, all the Canon users are like, why don't we have a spot meter? Well, we do. It's called partial. So then they finally gave us one called spot, but it's a teeny, 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 weeny spot. And it's not something we're ever going to use.
Okay.
So
use
it's
the
it's
partial.
too
Okay.
small for us to use.
All
Yeah.
right.
So on the back of your camera, it is for you Canon users. If you just look at that display panel on the back of your camera, the light meter icon is the rectangle with the parentheses and the dot in the middle of it. And Mark, your light meter icon is a rectangle with 5 segments in it. And that's the same icon that we have for Nikon. So you see where that little icon is on the back display panel of your camera?
I do, but on my display screen, it doesn't come out that way. What it comes out with is a plus and a minus in a square, and I have I do have that range thing, but it's not active. You know, I can't because this is a touch screen too. So you know, when I hit it, it doesn't. But I went back and checked in the menu, and I am on the completely, you know, segmental.
Segmented. Now
yeah,
that,
thing, yeah.
that little icon with plus and minus next to it, Mark, is something totally different.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right.
So you should somewhere have an icon on your back display panel that shows you what light meter you're on. Otherwise, just know where it is inside your menu. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And I see it
Good.
on my menu, so I can
Okay.
just try. Yeah. No, that's not it either.
Good. Everybody else knows where sees it on your back display panel.
I'm sorry, I don't know what I'm looking for.
It's a rectangle with a parentheses and a dot in the middle of it. And it's on your back display panel. So it should be, I think, on the second row, if I'm not mistaken. Rectangle with a parentheses and a dot in the middle of it. You see it, Carol, and you see it, Angela?
Mhm, yes.
Do you see it on there?
If you, because you've got it's so close, I can't see it, but move it back just a little bit and I'll tell you where it is. Move it back. Now you see where that L with a kind of a wedge next to it is?
Yes,
It's the icon right next to it. It's a rectangle with a parentheses and a dot in the middle of it.
this right here.
I can't see again. Next one over.
That right there.
Uh-huh.
And that indicates what?
That's your evaluative light meter.
Okay.
Okay. So if you push your Q button and move over to there using your toggle, then you should be able to push that and you'll see that that's your evaluative light meter. Okay. See?
Got it.
Yeah.
It's a miracle. I figured something out.
You did it. See, I told you, you can do it.
Oh, yay.
Okay, so now we know where you've got your light meters. And remember, once you get it set on evaluative matrix or your multi or your segmented, whatever it's called, chances are you're going to be able to leave it there most of the time. And so it's only in a rare instance that we're going to have to move that around. So to put, now that we've got the back end underneath machine set, now we have to get that light meter set right in the middle. And so we're going to do that with our f-stop and with our shutter speed. So let's learn about f-stops right now. So if you look at this photograph of this malachite butterfly, you'll notice that the malachite butterfly is in focus. The leaves are in focus, some of the leaves, the flowers in focus. But you notice that the background, that tan stuff, is out of focus. That's through my design of the photograph. So when I designed this photograph, I want the viewer to look at the butterfly and the little flower. Anything that is in focus in a photograph will draw the viewer's attention. Anything that is out of focus, the viewer will ignore. So we as humans look at everything in a photograph that is in focus and we ignore everything that is out of focus. So to make things out of focus, we use this thing called an f-stop. And so let me explain to you what an f-stop is. So if you would take the piece of paper, that or your handout, turn it over so that you can draw for just a couple of seconds, okay? And when you turn that piece of paper over, what I'd like you to do is draw yourself a horizontal line, but give yourself lots of room to write down on the bottom because you're going to write a lot of stuff right on the bottom. And then draw yourself a vertical line over on the left. But once again, you're going to put some numbers there, but I also want you to leave some room off to the side because you're going to draw there as well and right there as well. So under that horizontal line, I'd like you to write the numbers 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. So your numbers are 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. And then on your horizontal line, excuse me, on your vertical line, I need you to write the numbers 500, 250, 125, 60, 30, 15, 8, 4, 0.3 with quotation marks, and 2 with quotation marks, and then the word bulb. Angela, which age are you teaching photography classes to?
High school.
Hey, just wait till you see this. This is so cool. So this 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 11, 16, 22, these are called F stops. F with a slash sign and then the word stop next to it. F stops are the numbers you and I talk about. So if Carol were to ask me, what f-stop should we use, Kathy? I would say, why don't you try a 5.6? Or if I were to ask Angela, which f-stop did you use for that photograph? She would have said a 16. Or if we're looking through our viewfinder, Brett might say, I see that I've got an f22. Is that going to be enough or should I go to 32? You and I talk about f-stops. These are the numbers that we talk about. This is F with a slash sign and then the word stop. F for the function symbol for the high level math, a division symbol, that's the slash, and then the word stop. It's a mathematical formula. And luckily you never, ever, ever have to do the math formula. I teach it now in one of my more advanced classes, and it's really interesting the way that we come up with those numbers. But overall, you and I never, ever have to do the math. So that f-stop are the numbers that we talk about and the numbers that we see on the back of the camera. What's happening inside the camera that we don't see is we have this thing called an aperture in your lens. And that aperture is really, really, really big when you're at 2.8. So if you dial in a 2.8 on your camera, you're looking at the numbers 2.8, but you've got a huge aperture in the back of your lens that's letting in a lot of light. And if you go to 3.5, that aperture gets a little bit smaller. And if you go to 4.5, that aperture gets a little bit smaller. And if you go to 5.6, it gets a little smaller. And if you go to 6.8, it gets smaller. And if you go to 8, it gets even smaller. So it's letting in less light now. If you go to 11, it gets smaller, and 16, it gets smaller, and 22, it gets smaller, and 32, it gets even smaller. So you think, oh, okay, Kathy, that's interesting. But what happens that's really fascinating is the physics of light, the light coming through all of those lenses in your lens, because your lens is made up of about 6 to 9 ground glass optical lenses, convex and concave. And when you're at 2.8 and there's a big opening and a lot of light coming through that aperture, then your depth of field, DEPTH -of-field, depth of field, you're at 2.8, you have very, very tiny amount in focus. And when you go to 3.5, you get a little bit more area in focus, depth of field. And when you go to 4.5, you get a little bit more area in focus. So draw yourself a little bit longer line under 4.5. And at 5.6, you get a little bit more area in focus. 6.8, a little bit more area in focus. And under F8, make yourself a nice, thick, heavy line. Because there's this old saying in photography, F8 and be there. Meaning just put your camera on F8, you'll get more than enough depth of field, it'll look just fine, and just photograph away. So what's the program mode do? It puts you in F8. Most stuff's going to be in focus. You're not going to blow anything out of focus. You're not going to make anything look really creative. It's just everything's going to be in focus. So that's what F8 is. Most stuff's in focus. And then when you go to 11, you get more stuff in focus and 16 more stuff in focus and 22 more stuff in focus. And by the time you get to F32, infinity is in focus. So what you get with your lens is your f-stops, because the light is going through the convex and the concave lenses, and then it's getting squeezed down through the aperture. And physically, physics, PHYSIS, the light is changing as it's going through those lenses. So the depth of field is all the result of your lens. The theory of it will stay the same no matter what lens you're using, but it's the same in all of your lenses. The smaller your f-stop, the less stuff is in focus. The bigger your f-stop, the more stuff is in focus. How you can remember this? At 2.8, 2 things are in focus. At 32, 32 things are in focus. The bigger the number, the more stuff is in focus. The smaller the number, the less stuff is in focus. Okay? So your f-stop is all based on your lens and what lens you are using. So whether you want the background to be blurred so that nobody looks at the background, or whether you want the background to be sharp, is all based on what f-stop you use and also what the characteristics of your lens are. So put your camera in your hands if you would.
Kathy, a
Yes.
quick question though, so yes, every lens has its own f-stop, right?
Correct.
And some of them are fixed f-stops and some of them, actually change whether you zoom or you don't zoom. So what does the camera body then have to do with the f-stop if everything is being determined by the lens?
Hang tight. It's all
Okay.
based on the lens.
It's all based on the lens, but so the settings that I put in my body will be affected by the lens.
Nope, your f-stop will be based on your lens. So hang tight for just a second,
Okay.
okay? I'll answer
Okay.
that question.
All right.
Okay, now put your camera in your hands, and Mark and Brett and Carol, you all have 2-dial cameras. You have a dial on the back, a big dial on the back, and you have a dial on the front. You have a dial with your forefinger and you have a dial with your thumb, right?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Now,
correct.
Carol, Brett, and Mark, Carol and Brett, I know for sure if you rotate your back dial. Mark, I'm not sure if it's your front dial or back dial because I temporarily forgot that one. But if you rotate your Carol and Brett, rotate your back dial and you'll see that it now changes your f-stop. You have to push your button down, your shutter button down to turn the camera on. It's probably gone to sleep. And now when you rotate the back dial, it's changing your f-stop. Mark, is it your back dial?
It's my front dial.
Front dial,
Yeah.
okay, changing
Yeah.
that. Now don't answer my question yet. And I got to get Sue and Angela going, okay? So Sue and Angela, you all have rebels, which means that with your thumb on your right hand, you are going to push and hold the plus minus button on the back of your camera that I showed you just a moment ago. Remember, I showed you that plus minus button on the back of your camera? Push and hold that with your thumb, and now rotate your front dial with your forefinger. And that's changing your f-stops.
Oh, okay.
So what is the smallest f-stop you can get?
Four point oh.
Good, 4.0. What's the smallest f-stop you can get?
2.8.
Which one, Carol?
2.8.
2.8, good. Angela, what's the smallest you can get? Mark and Brett, what's the smallest you can get?
Go to 4.5.
4.5, good. Mark?
Smallest that I can get is going to be a 3.5.
3.5. Brett, what's the smallest you can get?
Same.
Same 3.5?
Mhm.
Okay, now zoom your lens. Zoom your lens in and out. Can you get a new smaller number?
Okay, no, I can't get a smaller number, but I can get a larger,
Now it's bigger when you zoom, right?
right?
Okay, everybody else, when you zoom, what, do you get a bigger number or a smaller number?
I'm not following. It's the same. What, how do you,
So yours still stays at 2.8,
yeah,
correct?
yes.
Okay, good, good. Sue, when you zoom, do you get a new smaller number or
I think so. Could you do me a favor and call me Sue Ann? I'm sorry.
Sue-Ann? Uh-huh,
Thank you. I think like 5.6 is now the
good.
smallest.
Okay, Angela, what'd you get?
4,
4, okay, but when you zoomed out, what was your other number? 5.6,
4.5,
4.5? And Brett, what'd you get?
5.6, I guess.
5.6, you got 3.5 the first time, but when you zoomed, you got 5.6, right?
Mm, That's right.
Yeah, now Angela, you were, when you zoomed back, you
Well,
got
now
a
it's a 3.5.
good, and when you zoomed out, you got a 5.6? Smallest
went-
number?
3.5 with the zoom. When I zoomed out, it went to 3.5.
It went to 3.5, and when you
Yeah.
zoomed in, the smallest number you could get was what?
It was 4. Let's see.
4.5?
It was 5.6.
It's 5.6. That's what I thought. Okay, so,
You
yeah,
actually get down to 3.5 when I have it zoomed all the way out now.
okay, so you get to 3.5. So everybody except Carol, when you zoom to your widest angle, then you can get like a 3.5 or a 4.5. You can get 3 point something. But then when you zoom out to your most telephoto, then you can get a 5.6 or something like that. So these are called variable f-stop lenses. When you're zoomed all the way out to your most telephoto, you can no longer get that same small number. Carol, you've got a fixed f-stop lens. So
Okay.
whether you zoom in or zoom out, you always get a 2.8, correct?
Right.
Right. Now, what the variable f-stop lenses, Sue Ann, Angela, Mark, and Brett, what you all have, the variable f-stop lenses are lighter, they're cheaper, and they're less expensive and they're lighter. And so the advantage of a variable f-stop lens is that you don't have to spend as much money, and it's also a more lightweight lens. A lens like Carol's, where it always stays at 2.8 as the lowest f-stop, whether she zooms in, is going to be heavier and more expensive. And so if you're looking for a small lightweight lens to backpack with, for instance, then that would usually be a variable f-stop lens. Or if you're looking at a small lightweight lens to let your teenagers use, like Angela's going to do, then that variable f-stop lens might be exactly what you want to give them because it's lighter and it's less expensive. So your lens, your variable f-stop lens or your fixed f-stop lens, they all take equally good pictures. They're just different in their construction. Now, what's the biggest f-stop you can get? Go the opposite direction. What's the biggest f-stop you can get?
Well, 22.
22,
36.
36. And then zoom around and see if you can get any bigger than that. So 22 and 36. How about everybody else? What's the biggest f-stop?
32.
32. Good. Mark, what's your biggest f-stop? And Sue Ann, what's your biggest f-stop?
36.
36. Good. Mark, what's your biggest f-stop? Didn't see. Okay, so it's the same thing at the high end. If you zoom one way, you can get a new bigger number. If you zoom the other way, then you can get a different bigger number. So your f-stops are all inside of your lens. And which f-stop you choose is totally based on how you want your photograph to look. So if you look at this photograph of the statue, you see how her fingers are out of focus. The statue's face is in focus, and then the wall behind the statue is out of focus. So what f-stop do you think I was using?
4.5.
About 4.5. Okay. Anybody else?
Something small, so something in that range or a little bit less.
Okay. Yeah. So it's about a 4.5 to a 5.6. 5.6, by the way, is one of my favorite f-stops because it just gives you kind of a nice little area in focus. The further the background is away from your subject, the more you can blow it out of focus. So in this photograph of this little girl, look closely at the screen and you'll see that her face is in focus, but you see how her earlobes are out of focus? See that? It's a little 2-year-old kid. So there's not much depth of field here. And this is an f-stop in probably about the f4 range or maybe a 3.5 range. And then focusing on her face, you see it gets pretty shallow. So we start, the area and focus starts dropping off pretty fast. And then you notice the background. What's in the background?
Who knows?
What is it?
Like a
Plant.
plant, a potted
Plants,
plant.
pots. Yeah, exactly. And I don't want you to even look at them. I want you to know that they're back there. But if I showed them to you in focus, then they're going to compete with the little girl. And then you're going to be going back there. If you're not interested in the little girl, you're going to be going back there and looking at pots. And before you know it, you're shopping for pots at Home Depot because those are exactly the color that you've been looking for. So anything in there that can distract you is going to pull you away from the photograph that we're trying to show. So we as photographers often move around so that we can get that distance between our subject and our background. So the more distance that I can put between my subject and my background, the more I'm going to be able to blow it out of focus. The closer my background is, the harder it's going to be to blow it out of focus. So we need distance between subject and background to be able to blow it out of focus. So you see here, we see the little girl's on a swing. We know she's on a swing. We know she's in a garden, but I don't need to show you the garden and I don't need to show you the swing. What's important is her. And so this, once again, is about a 5.6. And I've positioned myself as the photographer and positioned her so that she has a huge distance between her and the background so that I can blow the background out of focus. So the more distance I can put between my subject and the background, the more I can blow it out of focus. So for instance, F4 on the glasses, F22 on the glasses, F4, F22. So what are you trying to convey? What are you trying to tell somebody? Are you trying to tell them this? Or are you trying to tell them this? Are you trying to tell them this, crystal ball at F4? Or are you trying to tell them this, crystal ball at F22? And so you see that each one of them is the same subject, but what you're trying to communicate as a photographer is all based on what f-stop you choose. So your f-stop is in the design of your photograph. You're choosing which f-stop you want to use, how far away your subject is from the background, what's the distance between subject and background, and then that allows me to create my depth of field. So depth of field is that creative aspect that we're going to use in our photography. Now, Carol, you've got a 2.8 lens, right?
Right.
Right. Anybody else that you think in your bag? Don't go digging right now. Anybody else have a 2.8 lens in your bag? No? Okay, so a 2.8 lens. This is a 2.8 lens. And you see pictures of my cat's socks, by the way, not because he likes to have his photograph taken, but because he's the only one in the house many times. And so if I want to take a picture, I go find socks. But if you look closely at this photograph of socks, you'll see that his nose is in focus and you'll see that his eye is in focus. And so this is done with a 2.8 lens. And 2.8, I've already told you, means two things in focus. It's a very narrow depth of field. So with this 2.8 lens, what they are designed for is to give you that beautiful creamy background. Every lens is designed for a purpose. Every lens is constructed for a purpose. It's a tool, and it was made by the engineers for a specific job. So a lens that comes in 2.8 is designed to have this really, really pretty, pure background on it. But to get this photograph of socks where his nose and his eyes were in the same plane of focus, because your depth of field is a flat plane parallel to the back of the camera, to get this photograph where his eye and his nose were in focus, it took me 50 shots because the depth of field is so narrow that trying to get it in the right spot on a moving subject is very difficult. So if we have a 2.8 lens, we don't traditionally shoot it at 2.8. It looks great on Instagram, by the way, but if we blow it up at 100%, chances are it's all out of focus. And so it's a lens that is a specialty lens that we use for a specific purpose. So Carol's lens, for instance, she may not shoot it at 2.8, but she would shoot it still at 4 or 5.6. And then the background would be really nice and soft. So it's just a construction and design of the background. Okay.
So, Kathy, then, so the question, if you have a 2.4 lens, but you shoot it on your camera at a 5.6, then what is the actual f-stop that you're getting?
So it's measurable if you wanted to do the math equation. Otherwise, right now, what I'm teaching you is the theory of it. And after a while with your lens, you're going to learn how much depth of field that lens gives me, because it's all based on how close you are to the subject, how much you're zoomed out, and then what f-stop you're using. So you take all that into the equation of how much depth of field you actually have.
Okay, so is it better to try to buy a lens that has a variable depth of field, or better to buy one with a fixed depth of field?
But a fixed f-stop lens means if you zoom in and out, you can always get the smallest number. A variable f-stop lens means if you zoom in and out, when you zoom all the way telephoto, you can't get that small number anymore. So it's,
Okay.
once again, it's a construction of the lens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a little on the vague side, but you'll get it. Yeah.
No, okay. Yeah. Yeah. all
Okay.
right, yeah.
So looking at this photograph where you can see all the way down the river, what f-stop am I using?
Very large, 32.
32. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody understand? Everybody see where I'm using a 32 or a 22, something like that?
Yes.
Yeah, you see that? Okay, good, good. So it's an hour into class and you can already look at a photograph and tell me what f-stop you're using. So congratulations, you're rolling right on through. So your f-stop, if we want to take a landscape photograph, is going to be a 22 or a 32. So I just go to 22 or 32 and choose whichever number I want to go to. But now you look at this photograph and you see that the water in the turbulent water of the river is all blurred. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And you've never seen that in real life, right?
Right.
Doesn't look like that in real life. So you now are seeing one of the first photography special effects that I'll teach you about. So to blur the water, now we're going to have to do shutter speed. And
Mhm.
so if you would go back and look at that chart that I gave you before and look at your shutter speeds. So shutter speeds now, Mark, are inside your camera. And when you bought your camera came with a certain number of shutter speeds. And shutter speeds are how fast your shutter in the camera opens and closes to let light through the aperture hit the sensor. So your shutter opens and closes to let light through the aperture in the lens hit your sensor. So your shutter speeds are inside your camera. Shutter speeds stop motion or blur motion. Shutter stops motion or blurs motion. So when you're looking at a scene, you also have to look at it and determine whether how fast of a shutter speed I need to stop the motion or blur the motion in the photograph. So camera back in your hands, if you would, please. Camera back in your hands. And Sue Ann and Angela, this is easy for you. You just rotate your front dial. And Carol and Brett, you rotate your front dial, but you don't rotate the back dial. So you just rotate your front dial. And Mark, you rotate your other dial. And that changes your shutter speeds. And what's the fastest shutter speed you can get?
1/4000th.
Good, 4,000th of a second shutter speed.
Right.
What's the fastest shutter speed you can get?
$2,000.
2,000? Brett, you should be able to get faster than 2,000.
Go up further than that. Okay.
Yeah. Sue Ann, Angela, Carol, what's the fastest shutter speed you can get?
4,000, I guess.
4,000, good. Yeah,
1 to 4,000.
4,000, good.
Wrong here.
Carol, what'd you get?
Yeah, I don't know, I've done something wrong here. It says 30, that's not right.
And
Okay.
Brett, you got what?
Uh,
You're muted,
something
Brett.
wrong.
What'd you get? And what'd you get, Carol?
I've done something wrong here because I'm getting weird numbers. 30? Like that's
No,
not
go
right.
the other direction. Go the other direction.
I got 4,000.
You got 4,000?
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, yeah. I was way, okay, so I'm 8,000.
8,000. Okay.
Okay.
So shutter speeds are in your camera body. So most of you can go to 4,000 and then Carol's camera can go to 8,000. The reality is we're not going to use 4,000 very much at all. We use 8,000 occasionally. I was just in Alaska photographing whales and flying eagles. And so on good days, we were able to go into the 8,000 range and the 4,000 range. But we're not going to be able to go to 8,000 or 4,000 very often because it just takes a tremendous amount of light.
Mhm.
But rotate your dial now the opposite direction, your shutter speed dial the opposite direction. And what's the first number you get that has two quotation marks next to it? See the 0.3 with quotation marks on the screen? What's the first number you get that has quotation marks next to it?
0.3.
0.3 with the quotation marks. Good, good. What's the first number you get with the quotation marks?
3.
0.3 with the quotation marks?
0.3.
Yes. it's just
0.3 with the quotation marks? Good, good. And then Mark, what's the first number you get with quotation marks?
1.
1 with quotation marks? Good, okay. With your Canon cameras, then the first number you get with quotation marks is a 0.3 with quotation marks. You'll notice that that's a third. And you also have a 3 by itself with no quotation marks, and that's a third also. And so all that's happening in Canon is we're moving from fractions to decimals, because that 8,000 that we were at and that 4,000 we were at was 1/4,000th of a shutter speed or 1/8,000th of a shutter speed. So once we get to the 4, like you see on the screen, that's a 1/4 of a second. And then we get to a 3, and that's a 1/3 of a second. But then 0.3 is another 1/3 of a second. So in Canon, it just kind of doubles up on you. Don't worry about it. But then you notice after that we get to 1. Mark, you've got 1 with quotation marks. And then Canon, we've got 2 with quotation marks and 3 with quotation marks, right?
Yeah.
And anytime we see the quotation marks with whole numbers, that's when we're in to full seconds.
Okay.
So
this is
that, and then we
because
go all the way
30.
down to 30. Carol, you already found that. We go all the way
Yeah.
down to 30, and that's the 30 seconds.
I
Yes,
see.
Mark?
Oh, yeah, I go down to 60 seconds
60
before,
seconds.
and then
Good.
before I hit D, which is the bulb, I
The
guess.
bulb, exactly. And
right.
bulb is, as long as we hold our shutter button down, the shutter will stay open. So that's when we're getting to do some really creative things. Now you notice that we've got everywhere from 4,000th of a second all the way down to 30 full seconds. And by the way, you never have realized how long 30 seconds is until you're sitting there waiting for a photo to finish. And then you're like, holy moly, 30 seconds is a long time. It is, just to sit there and wait, especially if you mess something up and have to sit and wait for it. So you see how many shutter speeds you have? Just a lot of them. So if you look on your handout, I have given you 5 baseline shutter speeds that we'll talk about today. Sue Ann.
What does it mean when it says like 1/200?
That's
And-
1/200th of a second shutter speed.
Okay, so that's like super fast, right?
It's not super fast. It's moderately fast. 4,000, 1/4,000, that's fast.
Okay. So when 1/4,000, is that the fastest this camera does?
That's the fastest that camera will do. Exactly.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, if you look on your handout, I've given you 5 benchmark shutter speeds because you have a lot of shutter speeds to choose from. And instead of just dinkering around and trial and error, I give you 5 shutter speeds for you to work with. Now, remember, shutter speeds stop motion. So 1/8 of a second, for instance, stops water or blurs water. So that silky effect that I showed you just a second ago in this photograph,
Mhm.
if I want to blur the water, then I have to have a shutter speed of 1/8 of a second or slower. So if I want to stop gentle movement, then I'm 1/15 of a second, and we'll go through each one of those in just a moment. So knowing that when I set up in front of this scene, knowing that I wanted to blur that water, because as a photographer, once you learn how to blur water, that's all you ever want to do is blur water, because nobody else knows how to do it unless unless they've learned somewhere along the way. So once you learn how to blur water, that's it. We just blur water every single opportunity we get. So knowing that this water that I want to blur it, you all already told me that I want to do a f32 or f22. Let's do f32 instead. And then I know that I have to balance my light meter to get me to at least 1/8 of a second, if not slower. So going back to that chart, sorry, I know that I need an f32. So I'm standing there next to the river, got my camera on the tripod. I got everything all composed up. My light meter's on my evaluative or my matrix light meter. And I know I'm going to do it f32. So I got to choose one number. I'm going to go at f32. And now I'm going to follow with my shutter speed and rotate my shutter speed until my light meter scale goes right in the middle. And I'm going to let you balance your own light meter in just a second. Okay. So once my light meter goes in the middle, It's at F32, and lo and behold, for that moment in time, that day, that light, I balanced my light meter at 1/8 of a second. So now brain has to kick in. What's going to happen? F32, the viewer's going to see everything in the picture. 1/8 of a second, the water's going to blur. Okay, bingo. That's what I was looking for. Now Carol's going to stand next to me. And your lens goes to 22, right, Carol? That's the
30.
that's the biggest f-stop you could get. Could you get 32?
Sorry, no, 22, you're right.
Yours goes to
20.
22. Okay.
Yeah.
So Carol's standing next to me. She's composed up exactly the same frame that I have. And she says, well, wait a second, I can only go to F32. Well, what's
22.
going to happen if she's composed up the exact same scene is her light meter, the scale, remember that scale I showed you an hour ago? Her
Yeah.
scale is going to go right in the middle at F22 at 1/15 of a second. And she's going to say, well, wait a second, my water's not going to blur. Correct. Her water is not going to blur. And she's going to say, but wait a second, I came here to make the water blur. If she waits about 15 or 20 minutes for the sun to set a little bit more, she'll be able to get F22 at 1/8 of a second. But by that time, I'll be F32 at 1/4 of a second. So where we balance our light meter is based on the light that we have at the moment
Mhm.
and the equipment that we've got at the same time. But what's interesting is if I go to F16, my light meter will balance. Come on, there you go. If I go to F16, my light meter will balance at 30. And if I go to F11, my light meter will balance at 60. And if I go to F8, my light meter will balance at 125. And if I go to 6.8, my light meter will balance. Come on, there we go. At 6.8, my light meter will balance at 250. And if I go to 5.6, my light meter will balance at 500. So there are a huge number of places we can balance our light meter. Where you balance your light meter is based on your educated knowledge of what the f-stop is doing and what the shutter speed is doing. So if you just willy-nilly balance your light meter, then maybe the water will blur and maybe it won't. And maybe I'll see all the background and maybe I won't. So you're making a concentrated effort to balance the light meter based on what you want your picture to look like. Because f5.6 at 50 is equal to 6.8 at 250 is equal to 8 at 125. So I can balance my light meter at any number of combinations. The right combination is based on you knowing what f-stop and shutter speeds are, what they do, and you designing your photograph. Now, Angela, you teaching these kids?
Mm-hmm.
That 30 is half of 60 and half of 125 and half of 250 and half of 500. You see that?
I do.
And you see that 8 is half of 16 and 11 is half of 22 and 16 is half of 32. And you also notice that we can balance the light meter in a straight line on a graph
Mm-hmm.
because they're all equal. So photography is loaded with math. And that's what makes it so much fun. So it's a very precise art that's logical and makes a lot of sense.
So when you're talking about getting the water to blur the water at the 32,
Yes.
the same thing can happen then down at the 5.6, as
If
long
your
as you
shutter speed was
if
slow enough.
is slow enough.
Exactly. Exactly. So
Okay.
here, for instance, is the same water done at 1/25th of a second. And if you look on your chart, that's 1/25th at like 1/8 of a second or something like that. But then if I want to blur the water, here's the F32 at 1/8 of a second. But notice that the light is exactly the same. What changes is how much movement is stopped and how much movement is blurred. So trout fishermen want to see turbulent water.
Yeah.
Photographers want to see blurry water. So who's your audience and what are you trying to educate them about? Turbulent water or blurry water? So your shutter speeds determine how much movement we stop and how much movement we don't stop. Does it make sense now, Mark?
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, that concept I've got, you know, I
Good.
understand. I also appreciate the fact that the slower your shutter speed, the steadier your camera has to be as well.
Oh, yes,
And
definitely.
so, yeah, so we kind of get into tripods or,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
stabilizers and
Well,
all that.
We'll
stuff,
talk
yeah.
about that in lesson 2, exactly.
It,
Yeah.
it does impact the light, right? Because that's why you have to make adjustments in your f-stops.
As
Yeah.
long as the scale is in the middle,
Mhm.
then the light is exactly the same.
Yeah, okay.
But which combination you use determines how the motion stops or the motion freezes.
Mhm.
And then also notice this one's an F32. Remember we determined that?
Mhm.
But then the other one with the faster shutter speed was about an F8. But look at this mossy log right here in the corner, in the lower corner. You see how it's in focus in both photographs? See
Hmm.
that?
Mhm.
So also lenses, I told you, are tools. And we use in landscape photography, we use lenses that have very, very fat f-stops. And that allows us to go from an f32 to maybe an f8 without you noticing so much, or the viewer noticing so much. And so it's all based on what tool we're using, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on also. Okay, so every lens is a tool. So looking at the water at the canal in Venice, looking at the water's blurred. So roughly what shutter speed do you think I'm using?
So that would be the 1.8.
Or the
Pretty
eighth of a
slow mo-
second?
Slow moving water, so maybe 115, maybe get away with it.
Yeah. So water always blurs at an eighth of a second. So somewhere around eighth of a second. You notice the people that have turned into ghosts on the sidewalk. You see
Yeah.
them?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So people walking along have also blurred out. Now, notice the guy with the white bag. You see how he's looking in the window? So he's looking in the window. So he's a little bit more solid than everybody else. And then this lady right here is a little bit more solid. So depending on how stationary people were standing determines whether we were able to freeze them or not. So you don't know what f-stop I was using, but you don't know what shutter speed I was using, but you know it's a slow shutter speed. What f-stop do you think I'm using?
A big number.
A big
Large.
number?
Yeah. 22.
Yeah, so
22.
in that 22 or 32 range, exactly. So, you can look down there and see, okay, so we've got a wide f-stop going on here. If we speed up the shutter speed just a little bit, you'll see that you can see the gondolas.
Hmm.
But if your shutter speed is too slow because the gondolas are moving slow, the gondolas will disappear. But if your shutter speed is fast enough, the gondolas will show up. And then in this case, you notice that we've got the man's leg that's a little bit on the blurred side. But otherwise, what we call ghost photography is where if the shutter speed's long enough, then most things that are moving will just disappear. So it becomes fun to play with this. So if you want the gondolas, then your shutter speed's going to have to be fast enough to freeze the gondolas. So maybe a 1/25th or a 2/50th of a second. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good, good. So what I want you to do is put your f-stop at 5.6, please. And Brett and Mark, go ahead and turn your microphones on because I'm going to ask you questions and you can just reply back really fast to me, okay? So everybody's at 5.6?
No, okay, now I am sorry.
Yay. Okay. Everybody's at 5.6. Okay. I want you to point your camera at a lighted area in your room, maybe a lamp or a light overhead or something like that. And leaving your f-stop at 5.6, rotate your shutter speed until the scale goes right in the middle. And when the scale goes right in the middle, tell me what shutter speed you got, and then also click the camera and take a picture. So rotate it, your shutter speed dial, that's the single dial. Rotate your shutter speed dial until the scale goes right in the middle at f5.6. And then when it goes right in the middle, yell out what shutter speed you got and take the picture. Put the camera to your eye, Sue Ann. There you go. And when your scale goes right in the middle, tell me what shutter speed you got.
I don't understand what you mean by the scale going in the middle.
Remember that light meter scale that I showed you earlier in that hummingbird photo where the light meter scale was right on the bottom of the viewfinder? Push your shutter button halfway down and you'll see your light meter scale show up on the bottom of the viewfinder.
I went to 60.
How do
60.
I move it?
What's your speed?
You have to rotate your shutter speed dial to make your light meter moves. Angela, you got it at 60?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Take the picture, did you?
I did.
Good, 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 good. Okay.
Again,
I don't understand.
What'd you get, Carol?
10.
10? Good, good, good. Sue Ann, try it again. Just
Oh.
rotate the front dial until the scale goes right in the middle.
I don't know what you mean by the scale going in the middle.
Look in the bottom, look through the viewfinder. You see the scale down there right next to 5.6? It's on the bottom of your viewfinder, right next to the number 5.6.
I don't understand.
And when you rotate your shutter speed dial, you'll see that scale go right in the middle. Brett and Mark, how y'all doing?
Scale doesn't seem to be moving.
60.
Then Sue Ann, if it's not moving, rotate it the other direction. Brett and Mark, what'd you get?
Well, I have
60.
1/4,
You have what, Mark?
Okay.
1/4.
1/4, good. Brett, what'd you get?
I thought I had 60, but maybe that's too. Let's see.
And then Carol and Angela, point your camera down at someplace dark, like underneath your desk, and do exactly the same thing. And what shutter speed do you get? What'd you get, Sue Ann?
1/30?
Yay, congratulations. Did you take the picture?
No.
No, take the picture. Come on. And now point your camera down at something something dark, like at the floor. And what shutter speed do you get?
1 with the quotes in the middle and 3.
Okay, good. Did you take the picture?
Yes.
Yeah, good, good. Brett and Mark, what y'all getting?
3.
3, good, good. Take the picture. Mark, what you getting? And Angela, what'd you get when you pointed the camera down the dark?
I'm kind of going still.
What?
I'm still looking.
Okay,
I think I got 2 in the 2 inches. Like,
Good. good.
what are
good.
those? What are those little
Quotation marks, those are seconds.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. What'd you get, Angela?
It looks like the 5 with the quotation mark?
Yay. Now click the shutter and you'll notice that's a long shutter speed because it's 5 seconds. What'd you get when you look down in the dark, Mark?
2.
2. Good, good, good. Okay, now everybody, I want you to pull the picture up on the back of your camera. That's the little rectangle with the little blue arrow in the middle of it. Pull the picture up on the back of the camera. And this is an ugly picture, I know, but does it look like it did in your room? Does the
Yeah.
light look like it did in your room?
Oh, it's much better lit.
Yeah, it looks better.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Brett and Mark, it looks like it does in your room?
A little better, a little more visual, but
A
not
little
much.
more visual,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, Mark?
So the bright picture came out looking reasonably okay. The dark picture in mine came out being very oversaturated.
Oversaturated, that's interesting. Yeah,
So that the like the light brown floors are now almost orange. That kind of stuff. Because I took a picture, like you said, under the desk,
yeah, that's good.
and that was very dark.
Yeah, and so your camera was trying to bring it out is what was going on with that one.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so you all have now balanced your light meter, and I want you to pat yourself on the back because now I have given you an f-stop and you have balanced your light meter with a shutter speed. So congratulations. So you
We
have
are
now
all brilliant.
balanced your light meter. Okay,
Got it.
good. Now we can do that. We're going to do that some more when you get into your homework, but now you've at least done it at least today for one time. Now, shutter speeds. I told you 1/8 of a second blurs water. Now let's go through the other shutter speeds and why you would use them. A 1/15 of a second is if you have gentle movement. So I've got my camera on the tripod. I want to take a picture of this redbud branch. And I look through the viewfinder and the redbud branch is moving gently in the breeze up and down. So now instead of just taking a static photograph of a redbud branch that's just sitting there, I'm taking a photograph of something that's moving. So the first number I dial in now is my shutter speed because I have to stop the movement. So gentle movement, Kathy's told you on your handout, starts at a 1/15 of a second. So I dial in a 1/15 of a second, and now I follow with my f-stop. So if we have gentle movement in a scene, then we need at least a 1/15 of a second to stop that movement. If we have a living creature that's blinking its eyes, moving its head, twitching its whiskers, looking around, I have to have at least a 1/60th of a second. So anytime we've got a living creature in front of the camera, kid, cat, dog, anything in front of the camera, then we've got to have at least a 1/60th of a second to stop just basic old ordinary living movements. So whether it be a frog or whatever, we've got to have at least a 1/60th of a second. So that's for living creatures. Now notice also that Sox's eyes are in focus. See that?
Yeah.
That's because I focused on his eyes. I don't let the camera choose where it's going to focus. I focus where I want it to be. Photography is a control thing, that we are in control of this. So if I don't have his eyes in focus, then people are not going to want to look at the photograph because we do not like eyes that are out of focus. We don't like cat, dog, horse, grandmother, granddaddy, lizard, snake, frog, whatever. We do not like eyes that are out of focus. So we always want the eyes in focus. So to make sure that the eyes are in focus, we move our focus point to the eyes. Otherwise, the camera is going to focus right in the center of the frame. So we move the focus point. So how you move your focus points, all of you Canon cameras, you all have this topmost right-hand button that has a rectangle or 9 little dots in the middle of it. You touch that with your thumb and then either rotate the front dial, the back dial for Carol and Brett's camera. Carol and Brett, you all also have a little toggle right here, and that toggle will let you go horizontal or vertical and as well as diagonal. And then that toggle also right here on this big dial, you can go vertical, excuse me, you can go diagonal on that as well. So Carol and Brett, you all have a screen that looks something like this. So for the cat, for instance, I would activate this one individual focus point right here, and then I would move it around with my back dial or else my little toggle. The two rebels, Angela and Sue Ann, you all have exactly the same button, topmost right-hand button right here on the back of your camera. And then you can rotate your front dial and it will, the focus point will run all the way around this little diagram, and you can leave it wherever you want it to be. So I use one individual focus point. And then Mark, you've got this probably the same icon that allows you to change your focus point. Or I bet you can also touch the back of your screen, can't you? And Carol, can you?
Yeah, there is a manual focus sort of area, and I'm just trying to see, because in my focus mode of manual of AFS, AFF, AFC.
No, I want you to leave it on AFC. That's where I put you before, and I'll explain why
okay.
next class. It's where you're
Okay.
making your individual focus points where you can make the selection. You've got a little icon that looks very similar to this on your back display panel.
Right, I do, but that one actually, mine brings up, the quality of the image, whether I
Okay.
want raw or
Okay. Okay.
raw plus, yeah. So I've got to find,
So
yeah.
make a note, Mark, and if you can't find it, I'll look through your manual for you. But make a note and to be able to find that place where you can change your individual focus points.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
I know it's got to be in here somewhere.
Yeah, it
but-
is. It's fairly simple to find once you locate it. Now,
Yeah.
why this is so important is because you putting the focus point. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell Pam. Pam, yours is right here. And once again, you push your I button and then you go to this little icon right here, push your set button in, and then you can change around your individuals and you'll see your individual focus points right here in this little screen, Pam, on the back of your screen. I forget that she's not here. Okay. So for instance, for this lioness, she's down in the grass in Africa. We're in the Land Cruiser looking straight down on her head. The guide tells me as soon as she hears the male roar, she's going to raise her head up, she's going to look around, and she's going to leave. So that tells me, the photographer, I need to have a focus point up toward the top of my screen so that when she raises her head up, I can reposition the camera so that that focus point is right on her eye. And then I'm going to photograph like crazy while she's got her head up there. So we move that focus point around based on where we need it to be for our photograph. Carol, question?
Well, I'm just trying to figure out, so you're estimating where her eyes are going to be. And where are you actually focusing when you're hitting that focus button and adjusting your lens?
So when I'm looking down on her head, I just know that I need to put one of those top focus points activated.
Okay.
And I'm already figuring out based on how big her head is, because I don't have a zoom lens in this case. So I already know how big her head is because I can see it. And so all I'm doing is when she starts raising that head up, I just keep that top focus point right on those eyes.
Okay.
And then go from there. Okay, so it's a skill that you've got to develop, but it makes your pictures a lot more interesting. So by putting those individual focus points up on the top of the frame, for instance, on the man's head, then it doesn't get caught on his hand right there. It goes right up to his eyes. And that makes the picture look a lot more interesting.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You see? Yeah.
Yeah,
So 120, excuse me, 2/50th of a second is what we need to stop trotting, fast walking, slow running. So trotting. So a man going by in a parade on a horse, I need at least a 2/50th of a second shutter speed to make that stop. A little kid on a swing, I need at least a 2/50th of a second shutter speed to make him stop. Now, it's not a big kid, it's not a teenager on a swing, it's a little kid on a swing. But if I'm going to stop that action, then I need a 2/50th of a second shutter speed. And remember, I'm going to set that. And then whatever the f-stop is that follows it to put the scale right in the middle, that's the f-stop I've got to use. So we choose one and we're given the other number. And if it's not the number we want, then we might be able to make some adjustments. But just in the beginning right now, we choose one based on how much action we've got going on. Okay. So the blue-gray tanager in Costa Rica here, he's not a fast moving bird, but kind of a nice little moderate moving bird. So that's going to be a 2/50th of a second shutter speed. So we have to set that shutter speed based on how much movement we've got, because that's going to stop the subject. And you notice in this photograph how I've got the focus point over to the side. And once again, it just makes the picture look a whole lot more interesting instead of every subject right smack dab in the middle of the frame. So I look through the viewfinder and I've got this really, really neat background going on there. And there's a plate of fruit underneath there that the bird's coming to. So why put the bird in the middle of the frame when I can move it off to the side and make the picture look more interesting? So it's the designing of our photographs so that people want to look at our pictures by moving those focus points around and changing them. So 500th of a second shutter speed, that's what I need for the whale's tail. So the whale tail, the fluking whale with his tail going up in the air, then that's where I need at least a 500th of a second shutter speed, if not faster. But really the 500th of a second shutter speed here is to stop the balls of water. Water forms balls at 500th of a second. So remember I told you that water blurs at 1/8 of a second? At 500th of a second, a splash forms balls. So in this case with the whales are fluking. And I know that I need a faster shutter speed than 500th of a second, but I can't get it because I don't have enough light. So once you hit the end of your f-stops, there's no more aperture to open up to give me more light. And so then in this case, what I did is I waited till the whale's tail got all the way up, and now he's sliding into the water slowly, gracefully, with the splash around him, and the 500th of a second froze his tail that way. But if I wanted to go to a faster shutter speed, like we were doing in Alaska last week with the whales, then I would change my ISO. So far we have not talked about ISO. So ISO is the last secret weapon that you have as a photographer: light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. So your ISO, if you look at the back of your camera, and I don't want you to change anything right now, because everybody should be at ISO 100 right now. That was on your handout. But if you look at your ISO, where it is on the back display panel, your ISO changes how fast your sensor records light. So if I wanted a faster shutter speed, like I would have wanted with this whale's tail, and if my f-stops don't allow me to keep going down the chart to get to a faster shutter speed, then I could change my ISO, and the higher my ISO goes, the higher I can get my shutter speed to go. So ISO is how fast your sensor records light. Now, the higher you move your ISO, the worse your pictures are going to look. the higher your ISO, the worse the light, the worse your picture is going to look. So unfortunately, a lot of photographers now are just thinking that they can just shoot on high ISOs all the time. But the reality is we can't. So a high ISO gives you a graininess, a smoothness to a photograph. So if you look at this photograph that I took in Morocco out in the Sahara Desert, the guys are playing the drums after we've eaten dinner, and we're going to do some night photography out in the Sahara Desert so we don't have any light pollution, and we're going to sleep in those tents. Unless you think that I'm really roughing it, there's a flush toilet in that tower right there, so don't think that I'm really roughing it, okay? But I am not going to not photograph these guys playing the drums around the campfire. So cameras on the tripod, I just raise my ISO until I get a 60th of a second, but a 60th of a second is going to be too slow because they're moving around. So I move my ISO until I get to about 2/50th of a second. If you look at it back here, you know, the rugs look good. The fireplace, the fire pit looks really good. Everything looks good, but you notice that I've lost some of their hands. You see that? So my shutter speed's still not fast enough. And if we blow it up, then you see, come on. There we go. Dragging on me, go back. There we go. If we blow it up, then you see that we've still got the hands all blurry. So even though I got my 2/50th of a shutter speed, I lost some action in the hands. I can take it into noise reduction software because we have all kinds of noise reduction software now, but that still just smooths it out. I still can never recover the hands. But if you want the photograph, and if you don't have enough light to get your shutter speed, then by all means, push the button and raise your ISO until you get the shutter speed you want. So I'm not shying away from high ISOs anymore. But the more expensive your camera is and the newer your camera is, the better your high ISO is going to be. The less expensive your camera is and the older your camera is, the worse your high ISO is going to be. But it's also strictly a personal thing. You know, if you want the picture and you want to raise the ISO really high, then go for it. It's your photograph. This Jaguar here is at a super high ISO down in the jungles of the Pantanal in Brazil. But I'm in a boat with 12 other photographers and we are jostling around. So we have to stop our movement of the boat going around. Everybody's jockeying to get position. We've got a man in the back who's standing up. We got a motor that's going on. And on top of that, the Jaguar is walking in the shade. So this is a ISO in the 20,000 range to get a fast enough shutter speed. But I wanted the picture. And if you look at it, not real close, doesn't look bad. But I'm also using the top of the line camera that Canon makes. So it all depends on how high you can tolerate, how high ISO you can tolerate. And if you want your picture, you want your picture. That's all there is to it. So this cologne shop that a friend of mine runs in Florence, it used to be in the old days. We walked in there when on the photo tours, everybody had a tripod and she got all nervous because 12 photographers were in her shop with tripods. And now we could walk in there and I could just tell everybody, raise your ISO to give yourself a 60th of a second shutter speed and start shooting. And now she would be happy. So your high ISO is totally up to you. The little kids across the table from me at a family gathering, I wanted a picture of them. So I just put the camera on the table. I knew I needed a 60th of a second to stop them, but they're not moving too fast. So you could probably even go 30th of a second. But I raised the ISO, put the camera on the table, used my back display panel, focused on their little faces and just photographed away. And they didn't even know I was photographing them. So we can raise that ISO when we want that photo. And for me, if it's a really special photo, then I don't care really how high my ISO is. Otherwise, keep your ISO as low as you can. Remember, the lower the number, I've got you all at 100 right now. That's your baseline number for your camera manufacturer. That's the best quality photo you can get is at ISO 100. So looking at the lightning photograph, is this a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed?
Fast.
Fast.
Fast. Brett says fast. Carol says fast. Fast shutter speed, slow shutter speed.
I
Fast.
think it's slow
Fast. Sue Ann, why do you think slow?
because that all didn't happen at the same time. And so I don't know. I don't know. I just-
It's okay. It's okay. You have two options, fast or slow. It's
I
a
think it's slow.
slow shutter speed because if I used fast, I would just get a little fraction of each bolt. So by using a 30-second shutter speed, as the lightning cracks across the sky, I get the entire track of light.
Mhm.
That's
So
what I
it's a
was trying to say.
slow
Have
shutter
it all
speed.
at the same time.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
It's a
Yeah.
slow shutter speed. It was one of the best lightning storms I've ever been in my life. It was amazing. This is why we go to Big Bend in August on the workshops, is because we get lightning storms. The Acrobat flying through the air, is this a fast shutter speed or a slow shutter speed?
Fast.
Fast. How fast, Brett? What do you think?
Maybe 250.
Ah, this is the 4000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I saw her, this is out in Santorini in Greece. So we had plenty of light. And I saw her flipping and twisting around. I just said, may I photograph you, please? And she said, sure. And so the first time she flipped, I didn't know what she was going to do. And as a result, she just flipped all the way out of my picture and I didn't get anything. So the more you know about what your subject is going to do, the better photographer you're going to be.
Mm.
So I had to ask her, would you do that again, please? And she said, sure. So by that time, then I raised my shutter speed to 4000. And then when she flipped, I was able to follow her and get my shots. So if the faster your subject is, the faster your shutter speed is going to need to be. And the more you know about your subject, the better photographer you're going to be. So you have to know your subjects. And then if your shutter speed is going to be slow because we're in one of the gymnasiums or a darker environment, there's nothing wrong with letting the flags blur. There's nothing wrong with letting the skirts blur. It shows us that movement is going on. So we don't always have to try to stop everything. It's okay to let some movement happen because then that conveys to the human who's looking at the picture, oh, they're moving very fast. So shutter speed stops movement. And then the last thing I've got before I let you go for this evening, remember that histogram that we were looking at
Mhm.
on the back of your camera. So one of those pictures you just took, if you would pull up your histogram. So the Canons, you all are going to pull the picture up on the back of your camera and you're going to push your info button 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times until you get to the histogram. Mark, you're going to pull the picture up on the back of your camera and you're going to push your DISP button 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times.
That's the histogram.
That's the history. It looks like this. It's a graph. Yeah. And Sue Ann, your husband said you had the 3-color histogram, right? The red, green, and blue.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. You can change that in your menu settings. Okay.
Okay.
Everybody sees your histogram.
Mhm.
No,
So here, Angela, did you find it? Carol, you got it?
Yeah.
I did.
Yes. Okay. So what a histogram tells you is it takes all the pixels in your photograph, converts them to black and white. That gives you 256 possible colors of black and white. And then it graphs them. Angela, one more time, we've got math going on for your students. And the left corner of your histogram is your solid black pixels. That's how many solid black pixels you have. And the right side of your histogram, that's how many solid white pixels you have. Everything in between is all your 256 possible tonal values of black and white, from solid black to pure white. A good histogram goes all the way from the left corner to the right corner. What you do not want is you do not want a line going up the y-axis on the right side, because that is your pure white pixels, and those are the pixels that you have overexposed. So when you photograph that picture of your lamp, you probably have a spike going up the right side. And then you might also have some blinks going on. Do you have some blinkies going on in your photograph? Do you have some things that are blinking?
Yeah,
Yeah?
yes.
No? Sue Ann?
Yes.
No?
No,
No? Angela?
I'm still trying to find the histogram.
So now, Angela, it might be in your blue menu. You might have turned it off. And the same thing for highlight indicator is in your blue menu, and you might have turned it off. It might be disabled. So don't go look for it right now. Let me explain what it is so I can get you out of here by 9, okay? So
Okay.
your histogram, if it goes all the way across but does not spike up the right side, then you have taken a photograph that contains all the possible data in the photograph. Now you can take it into Lightroom or Photoshop and process it. If you have a spike up the right side, that is where you have overexposed those pixels and there is no data in those pixels. So this photograph of the cat on the couch, let me walk you through how I took this. The sun is coming through that window, and the sun coming through that window, I knew would overexpose, and the sun coming through that window, I wanted it to be super bright. So I turned my camera vertical. I composed it so that the sun was coming through that top left-hand side window. The cat was down on the couch. And then I dialed in my f-stop and dialed in my shutter speed, focused on the cat, took the picture. I knew that that sun was going to be coming through that window, so that should be blinking at me. That's called your highlight indicator. I looked at the picture on the back of the camera, pulled up the histogram, and lo and behold, the corner up here was blinking. The floor was blinking, the couch was blinking, and then the cat was blinking. That means all that's overexposed and there is no data there. There is nothing there. So instead of putting my light meter directly in the middle, I took a second photograph and underexposed by 1. So instead of balancing the light meter right in the middle, I made the light meter go toward the negative sign by 1 big, huge click. Took the picture again, looked at the histogram again. Corner window is blinking. That's what I want because I want the sun coming through that window. The floor is not blinking anymore. The couch is not blinking anymore. That means there's data there, but the cat's still blinking. So then I took the picture a second time, third time now, and underexposed by 2 stops, focused on the cat and took the picture. And now my histogram is what I've got up on the top. This area up here where on the y-axis is where I have overexposed that window, but otherwise there's detail in the floor, detail in the couch, and detail in the cat. So your histogram confirms whether you balance your light meter in the middle, or maybe we take this picture a little underexposed, or maybe we take this picture a little overexposed. So your histogram allows you to make sure that you've got the properly exposed image before you walk away. So you need to be looking at that histogram on the back of your camera along with your photograph.
okay, I now just realized what you mean by blinking. I'm seeing blinking on the picture now.
Yay!
What does that mean? It means
That means you overexposed that portion of the photograph. So if it was important, then you would want to retake the photograph, but underexposed. But let me warn you, the sun in your photograph will always blink. Don't worry about it. The sun in the sunset will always blink. Don't worry about it. But
Okay.
you don't want the floor and the couch and the cat to be blinking because there's nothing there. You don't
Okay.
want the wedding dress on the bride to be blinking because there's nothing there. So anything that's blinking at you means that there's nothing there. But certain things like light bulbs and lamps and the sun and the sunset, those are always going to blink at you. So you don't worry about those. So after a while, you just learn as a photographer to be able to look at the photograph and say, that's going to blink. So I
Okay.
knew good and well that this photograph of this cat on this couch was going to be tricky, but my histogram led me to the proper exposure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's enough.
Kathy, I don't, in my histogram, it's not really blinking, it's just moving up and down constantly. And it looks like a very active graph. The other thing too is that when I hold it up to the light, which I would expect then to really have much more on the right side of the histogram, actually all of the data seems to be on the left side, which is the black pixels.
And is your light meter, is your scale in the middle?
Yeah, I think so.
And you
It's the
asked,
multimetering.
yeah. And you
thing.
asked a two-part question. You've also got your histogram turned on during photography. So on your camera and some of the mirrorless cameras, we can turn our histograms on during the photography. So we can confirm that 2 stops underexposed is actually going to work because we can actually see the histogram while we're taking the picture. But on Carol, Sue Ann's, Angela's, and Brett's camera, they can't see that in real time.
Okay. So I'm seeing it in real time. So that's one thing. But then, and so that's the constant motion thing. But why, when I pointed it up at the spotlight, am I seeing a preponderance of signal on the left side, which is the black?
Because to properly expose that lamp overhead, it's going to turn everything else really, really dark.
Oh, okay. So the camera is actually doing that. It's doing an auto function, even though we have.
No. It's not an auto function and the camera is not doing that. The light meter, it's saying, okay, if you want me to properly expose this light bulb, then we got to give some stuff up. So it's
Right.
telling you we're going to have to give up that ceiling because you want me to properly expose this light bulb,
Right. Okay.
which we generally wouldn't want to do.
Right. Okay. So it's balancing it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we do want just one histogram. We don't want all the red, green, and blue. We would only use that if we were advertising photographers. Okay, on your handout, you all did a good job. Thank you. On your handout, you have homework between now and next lesson. So our next lesson is next Monday night, and you have 2 homework assignments. You are going to put something on a stool or a countertop, and you're going to position it 8 or 10 feet away from its background. And you are then going to steady the camera either on another stool or on a countertop or a tripod. And you are going to go through the f-stop scale that I've given you. And you're going to watch the background come into focus and go out of focus. And then you're going to use some running water. You can use a garden hose because the weather's going to be really good over the next couple of days. If you have a fountain in your backyard or a swimming pool with a fountain in it, then feel free to use that. If there's a fountain in your neighborhood, then go photograph that. Or if you just want to use your garden hose, or if you just want to use, if you don't want to go outside and you want to use your kitchen faucet, you can do that. It's not as much fun. But you're going to use shutter speed to blur the water all the way through, crisping the water using the little chart that I've given you. And then you are going to upload those photographs. I'll send you a Dropbox link tomorrow. Or if you already have a WeTransfer or a Dropbox link and you want to send them to me through your service, then feel free to do that. But send them to me by next Sunday evening, if you would. And then I will grab them, put them into the program, and then I'll show and we'll talk about your homework assignments. Okay.
So, Kathy, you'll, I mean, the actual assignment, the water shots, everything else, will you actually post that online somewhere, or are you going
It's on the handout that I sent you.
Oh, it's in the handout?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
You have homework assignment for this class, and then you have one for next class that I'll never see because we won't see each other after next class.
Okay, so, all right.
So everybody's good?
Yes, thank you for your
Thank you.
patience. I appreciate
Ma'am.
it.
Thank
You are welcome. It takes a little bit of patience to get you to this point, but then do your homework and you're going to see it makes sense.
Great, thank you so much.
You all have a
Thank
good week. I'll share the recording
Mhm.
with you tomorrow. And then I will send you a new Zoom link and I'll also send you a link to my Dropbox if you'd like to put your pictures in my Dropbox. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good
Bye.
night.